So I'm going to present our paper called The Bug's Life about analyzing the lifecycle and mitigation process of content security policy bugs. So what is this so-called content security policy? Well, about 10 years ago, major browsers like Firefox and Chrome introduced the content security policy as a defense in depth against content injection attacks, for example, cross-site scripting. So essentially, when a web browser fetches a web page, the web page has the opportunity to include a content security policy, defining what content is allowed on the web page. And consequently, this will be enforced by the browser client side. So since the introduction, there have been some upgrades to CSP. For example, on one hand, functionality has been added. On the other hand, new use cases. Nowadays, you can use CSP for framing control, for example. To be on the same page, let's see a small example. So let's say this is a social media platform. Anyone can create a public profile page, and this is a profile page of a hacker. So despite the input sanitization, the hacker still managed to include a JavaScript in this page, so everyone that visits the web page will have their cookies leaked. The social media platform can prevent this by employing CSP, for example, this policy, and as a result, the execution of the script will be blocked. So this is a very neat feature of CSP. So what is the problem then? Well, like any huge software project, there's going to be bugs. And because CSP is a security policy, these can lead to bypasses and vulnerabilities. Also, there have been some very nice research papers uncovering various issues and inconsistencies with the implementation. So in this project, we wanted to look at the root causes of these CSP bugs. And for this, we looked at code revisions that introduced or fixed CSP bugs. So these huge software projects that browsers are use version control software like Git, for example. And this means that any code change that is committed to the code base is recorded as a code revision. In this figure, each green dot represents such a code revision. And with this, for example, we can depict a bug lifecycle. So for example, the first red square depicts a revision in which a bug was introduced, and the first green dot thereafter, a revision in which it was fixed. So when we started this project, there was no comprehensive data set of CSP bug lifecycles. We had to create this ourselves. And if you know that nowadays more than 100 revisions are committed to these code bases, it's like, a day. It's like searching for a needle in a haystack, right? So we wanted to automate as much as possible of this process. So for this, we developed an automated framework. It uses dynamic evaluation to search for the introducing and fixing revisions over the full CSP development history. Of course, we need bugs for this, more specifically the proof of concepts. And lucky for us, the Chromium and Firefox project publicly disclose bugs after a while after they are fixed. So this way, we collected 75 unique bugs. We also wanted to include Safari, but the WebKit security team didn't respond to our inquiry. We also need revision binaries. So if you install a browser on your desktop, for example, you will most likely install a released version. But because we work on the level of revisions, we need specific revision binaries. Okay, so the framework that we developed is called Bughawk. It's freely available on GitHub. So how does it work? Let's say this is a revision range in which we suspect a bug was introduced. Other than that, we don't know anything about it. So we give this information to the framework, and it will evaluate revisions one by one by instructing the binaries to visit a proof of concept on a website. And by that, it can infer whether the bug is reproducible or not. So in this case, we also use binary search in this way. And eventually, in this example, revision 5 was the introducing revision. Okay, so there's a lot more details to it, but I won't have time for that. So just a few bullet points. The framework is fully Dockerized. It can run on any system that supports Docker. Every binary is executed in its own container. This is especially nice since especially the older browser versions need libraries that are often outdated at this time. Also, we can run evaluations concurrently. This speeds up the whole process of pinpointing revisions. And lastly, it also supports lifecycle analysis for other policies. So maybe you can use it in your future work. Let's continue with the results. So the thing we were most interested in were the introducing revisions. And for each introducing revision, we also labeled it with the intention. Why did the developers apply this revision to the code base? So you see these labels on the y-axis of this graph, and they're connected to the prevalence. So actually how many bugs were introduced by a revision that was labeled with this intention. Most prevalent by far is actually one revision in each browser. It's the introduction of CSP itself. These bugs are foundational. The bug was introduced together with CSP. And more interesting is that a lot of these bugs lived under the radar for a couple of years. Even one quite severe bug with a bounty of $5,000 lived under the radar for 8 years. Next in line is the revisions that modified CSP core logic. These are also likely to cause new bugs. I'm talking about, for example, enabling a new CSP feature or even fixing another CSP bug that introduced a next one. Then lastly, even the introduction of non-security features in the browser, for example, new mechanisms, can act as a bypass. By looking at the source code, we saw that some of these cases were introduced by the fragmented enforcement logic, and this might lead to oversights when developers touch this kind of code. Then the second finding I want to share today is that we've found that there's actually room for improvement for cross-browser bug sharing. What is the current practice? So when a bug is reported, it will hopefully get fixed, and part of the fixing process is also creating regression tests. If the bug is a security bug or another important bug, it is also shared with the other browser vendors through the web platform tests. So essentially, vendors push and pull regression tests to and from the shared repository. So to evaluate this process, we performed a cross-browser evaluation. Essentially, we take bugs reported for one browser and try to reproduce it over the whole history of the other browser. So we started with the 75 unique bugs in our data set, and 14 of these were reproducible at a point in time in both browsers. Now, 8 of these were only reported for one browser. When we looked at the fixing revision of the browser where it was not reported for, we didn't see any reference to a bug report. So this makes us believe that the bug was not known by the developers. Half of the 14 shared bugs could even be reduced in lifetime or even avoided at all if there was better communication between the browsers. So this already gives us an indication that indeed there's room for improvement. To investigate this even further, we also included the latest release version of Safari in this experiment, Safari 16.2. And here we could reproduce 4 bugs in the latest version. These were all reported by us, and 3 were fixed and 1 was not considered a bug. Even more important is that Safari was exposed for more than a year for each of these cases. Then the last finding I can share with you today is that inconsistent bug handling can lead to premature disclosure. In our data set, we found 3 bugs that were publicly disclosed before an effective fix was permanently landed. This comprises 2 Chromium bugs and 1 Firefox bug. And in each of these cases, the browser was exposed for 1 year, at least 1 year. Also important to note, so the Firefox bug was even still present in the latest release version. So we reported it, and then it was fixed. Okay, some brief takeaways to conclude my presentation. So our analysis confirms that indeed CSP design and implementation is very complex. Half of the collected bugs are foundational. It also confirms the fragile and fragmented nature of CSP code, and this makes it very difficult to maintain for developers. Bugs affecting multiple browsers are publicly disclosed before they are fixed in all of them. Some of these bugs were only reported for one browser, and we suggest to overcome this problem to use a back channel between vendors to jointly address the common security bugs and not solely rely on the regression test sharing as it is done now. There's many additional findings and insights in our paper, so I invite you to read it if you're interested. And again, I want to highlight that BugHawk is freely available. It can be part of your future work, and if you have difficulties, we're always open to collaborate. All right, thank you.